Did you know that with naps added in, LeBron James gets an average of 12 hours of sleep a day? I'm Chris Van Vliet, an Emmy award-winning TV host, and I'm obsessed with these kinds of stories of how people are wired to achieve greatness. My show, Insight with Chris Van Vliet, will take you into the minds of these top performers with in-depth conversations. Join me as we reverse engineer their habits and techniques so you can apply them to your own life. Insight is available right now on all podcast platforms.
What is crack-a-lackin' Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel. Back by popular demand, though, at least between my ears, is good friend and colleague, Bleacher Report's NBA national writer, Grant Hughes. Follow him on Twitter at GT_Hughes. We're going to get into some mid-season factor fictions that Grant is coming in blind to. I'll get into more of that in a minute, but just as a brief, quick, and important reminder, please continue rating and reviewing and subscribing to this podcast on iTunes. Search Hardwood Knocks on iTunes. Throw us that 5-star rating. Write whatever you want in the reviews. It helps us out a ton. And definitely subscribe and download all of our episodes wherever you're consuming our podcast. iTunes, help us juice those numbers whether you use it or not. But wherever you get your podcast, make sure you're subscribed and downloading every episode. And word of mouth, pass it along. Tell people, friends, family, acquaintances, random people on the internet that this podcast is at least pleasantly mediocre or sub-mediocre, let's call it. Let's not set the bar too high. With all of that out of the way, though, Grant, how are you doing?
I'm kind of nervous because you offered to send me. Normally we will discuss a little bit before we record these what we're going to talk about, and I recklessly declined this time, and so I'm just waiting to look foolish and uneducated. And well, also bonus for you, you're going to look really smart by comparison. So, but I did this to myself.
When I gave you the pitch for this podcast, I said, look, we can go into all-star rosters, but then you could tell by the number of words I used where I said, why don't we just do fact or fiction where you come in blind, that I didn't really want to do all-star rosters. In large part because I'm not into there being a game at all, but also the conversation bores me a little bit. I respect anyone who wants to talk about it, but you could tell which direction I was favoring based on the text message that I sent you for this podcast.
I could, and to further underscore my irresponsibility as a guest, I did spend literally all day today thinking about the All-Star game and putting together predictions for the reserves after the starters get announced tomorrow. So I could absolutely talk about that, and it'd probably be a really thorough, educated discussion, but we're not going to do that.
I've already prepped some snubs, too. I have to release snubs for starters after those are picked. But I don't have, if we get to it, because I have a ton, but since we're pressed for time, I'm just going to get through. I'm going to use the most interesting ones. A lot of trade deadline stuff, just because I feel like it's topical now, since teams are already benching players in anticipation of a trade deadline that's like 5 weeks away at this point. Yeah. Anyway, are you ready? Coming in blind, just to get through this.
I'm not getting any readier.
All right, I'm going to start with the Brooklyn Nets. Fact or fiction, the Brooklyn Nets will trade Spencer Dinwiddie.
Oh, that's interesting. I will say fact, and only because it doesn't seem like he's going to be back at all this year. His injury was weird. They called it like a mild ACL tear or a partial tear, which usually there's not that distinction. I don't know what that means, but he's out for the year, correct? Like,
yeah, they expect him to be out for the year with that torn right ACL.
Yeah,
or
so it's
partially torn right ACL. Excuse me.
You have to say that now. No, so just on the thinking that like this is a team that needs, all hands on deck and then some. It sacrificed all its depth to trade for James Harden, and Dinwiddie cannot help them this year. So, I mean, he can't help anybody else, which is what complicates the trade. So, like, who wants him, to take dead money for this year, and then he's probably going to opt out because I believe he's entering. He can enter free agency. You can correct me if he's got one more year, but I think
player
that's
option. So you're trading for him. Unless you're giving up a bad deal, you want his bird rights is the incentive.
Yeah. Which that's an interesting thing that's entered the trade discussions now is like, oh, you want this guy's bird rights? Like people talk about that with Oladipo a little bit. It's like, I don't know, dude. How much does that really matter? So I'll say fact just because he can't help the Nets and they need guys that can help them, so they're motivated to move him.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily believe all of these. These are just topics that I've plucked that I find interesting. I would call this a fact, too. I just think they need his salary filler because they're not going to move DeAndre Jordan. And I do think his bird rights, because he's such a good offensive player, will be important to some teams that maybe aren't slated to have massive cap space or wouldn't be able to appeal to him in free agency normally. The team that I think he's a great fit for, I don't know how much they value his bird rights, would be Orlando. Can you work out something built around? It would have to be Dinwiddie and stuff. They have Shamet and second-round picks and TLC for Aaron Gordon once he's healthy. Or maybe you don't need stuff because Aaron Gordon's injured right now. The other one I thought about is how much foresight is Memphis operating with, and would Jonas Valanciunas be on the table? Because he'd be interesting for this team.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys you'd say would be interesting for the Nets, or you could say, well, he could play for them, right? Because they're just, I mean, they're just thin. And I don't think the buyout market is going to really be as impactful for them as you'd expect, just because, like, who's realistically going to be there? I don't know. I mean, maybe Andre Drummond. I don't want to jump the gun. I'm sure we'll talk about him, but
let's talk about him next. And we have a mailbag question that I skipped over in our last mailbag, and I felt bad doing it because I get questions when we don't have mailbags in my DMs, and I fully appreciate those people. And I missed one during our last mailbag, so I'm gonna throw it onto you with Andre Drummond. But let's start here. Fact or fiction? Andre Drummond gets bought out, not traded.
Ooh, I feel like I'm gonna say, oh, that's a good one to all of these.
No, I have a few that I know you're gonna despise. Don't worry about it.
Well, I kind of hate this one because it's hard. I'm gonna say fact. He will get bought out because I just don't know. Like, he's got the cosmetic numbers, right? You know, the whatever it is, 17-ish and 13-ish or something in that neighborhood. You know, gets a bunch of steals and all that stuff. But he's shooting. This is as of a couple days ago, like 47.4 or 48.4%, and he only shoots twos. So I'm not sure he's a major impact guy that you would give up the requisite salary to acquire. And I'm assuming you're talking about a team that is contending or fancies itself a contender, like a Boston or something like that, that needs a body, needs a big guy in the middle that could theoretically close playoff games, which maybe Drummond is. I don't know. But I just don't see a realistic trade for him. And so he is the type of guy that you could imagine a buyout for, you know, unlike Blake Griffin, who I think is kind of linked because he's also sitting out, who's got that player option for like $39 million next year. That's not, I can't imagine how you arrive at a buyout number for someone like him. Drummond's a little bit easier, I guess, because he's, you know, just expiring this year, and, you know, he could take half of whatever he's got left on the books to take off. So I like the buyout option for him.
It's the money for me. There are teams that I think would be interested in him, but how do you compiling the money? Like, let's use Toronto as the example because they were linked to him. Just getting to $28 million, it's so hard. He's at you don't have to get there, but $28.8 million. So you have to get over $20 million in salary if you're a normal team. And there are teams like Dallas. Everyone links them to a big. I think it's fair this season because Kristaps kind of sucks on defense, but. Like, you have one contract maybe you're okay getting rid of. And let's say Norman Powell for Toronto. That's $10.9 million. Like, where are you coming up with the other 10? Like, I wouldn't give up Chris Boucher in that. Yeah, you give up Patrick McCaw. Yeah, you give up no, he's not on there. But, maybe you give up Stanley Johnson. But now you're getting into a scenario where it's 4-for-1 in the middle of the season. And it's just not going to happen. So, and I don't know that there's like a really bad contract out there that, you could definitely move him if you're taking back bad money. But even if, let's use Dallas and say they want to get rid of Dwight Powell's money, even though he's been up and down this year, I'd say mostly bad. He's still only making 11.1. And so it's like, okay, Dwight Powell and James Johnson, that does work. But what else are you giving Cleveland in that scenario? There are just so few situations like that where it seems like that could work. I expect him to get bought out. It's just the sheer volume. It's not because he's a bad player, but you can't invest that type of money in such a pure five at this time.
Well, yeah, and to go back to the Toronto example, because they are kind of perfect for it. Like, I don't think you involved Norm Powell because I think he probably gives the Raptors more than Drummond does. Just,
waiting for big trades are weird.
Yeah, forget the dollar amount. If you lose Powell and you're the Raptors, and Kyle Lowry just went down, I think today or yesterday. You're not replacing Powell. I just don't know where that production comes from. But the other thing is, if you do start throwing take our 5, the 5 contracts we can throw together that we could get close to the number for Drummond. And then, like, okay, fine. Maybe one or two of those guys is a rotation guy. So now you're down a rotation player, and you got to replace those guys on the roster with minimums or whatever. And so if you're taking on Drummond, which is going to be more than you sent out, theoretically, and then you're replacing those guys, and you're a good team like Toronto or someone that theoretically would go for Drummond, now you're bumping your tax bill up. And, like, is Andre Drummond worth his salary plus whatever the tax penalties are? I don't know, man. Like, there's just that's his expiring deals are always great, but that number is just too big to make sense in almost every trade you put together.
And he probably wants to get traded so that he can go somewhere that'll have his bird rights, but the reality is I just don't see it, which is why the Cavaliers, I don't know how you felt about Draymond Green's talking points. I think he used a lot of the wrong players when he's mentioning James Harden and Anthony Davis. The coverage of Kyrie Irving has definitely been unfair at points, but this past time where it's like, yeah, I kind of get that maybe he needed a break, but then he shows up and he's partying with his sister. Those guys' careers aren't on the line. Drummond and Griffin are interesting to me just because it's like we're so far from the trade deadline. This feels more like a team-driven thing when realizing that they don't have a market. And that's like it's just a readily existent market. It's like those are the players I'd focus on. Where I don't know that Andre Drummond is fighting for his career right now, but it does suck for them because he's not the type of player that has the leverage to force a trade. And while he might be amenable to sitting right now, you don't think this has to do with Cleveland wanting to play Jared Allen more? And this just gives them an excuse to do that without having to have Drummond in the rotation, taking up space or being angry about his playing time or hijacking possessions because he's a free agent and wants to make his money.
You made me think. I'm going to throw a fact or fiction Drummond related back at you because you made me think of it with the bird rights issue. Fact or fiction, the team Andre Drummond goes to, however it happens, leaving the Cavs this season, will not be the team he plays for next year. Because he seems like a rental to me. I'll just say it's fiction from my end. But like I don't imagine that a team is trading for Andre Drummond right now thinking like, oh man, we got to have the ability to keep this guy for a market rate salary and we want his bird rights to do that. I feel like he's just a stopgap for somebody, and then he's going to, he'll just hit unrestricted free agency and sign someplace else. That feels like the path to me.
Yeah, especially maybe if he's traded, you could say that's the team he'll play for next year. But if he's bought out, I would absolutely think that he'll end up with a different team in free agency.
Your company's salary cap is probably tighter and you can't afford to miss on a new hire. Every person you add needs to fit just right. Indeed.com is the hiring site that helps you find quality candidates instantly, so you can do the part you really need faster, meeting and hiring great people. Indeed searches through the millions of resumes in their database to help show you great candidates instantly. With Instant Match, you see a list of great candidates with zero wait. Want our quality shortlist fast? You need Indeed. Right now, our listeners get a free $75 credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. This is Indeed's best offer anywhere. Get a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer valid through March 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
Hardwood Knocks listeners, I hope you're all sitting down because we have to tell you something monumental. We love sports betting, and whether you've been betting for a while or you're thinking about getting started, we want to let you know about a great resource for sports bettors, the Action Network. The Action Network is where sports fans go to bet smarter and experience real financial gains. In fact, their Action Network app was recently named the best app in sports betting. And with an Action Network Pro subscription, you can unlock the very best of the app. When you sign up for an Action Network Pro subscription, 1, you can access the Pro Report, which includes expert projections for every game. 2, you can see money and bet percentages on every game, so you can see the teams professional gamblers are betting on. 3, you can take advantage of pro systems, which match winning historical betting trends with the latest games and lines. And 4, you can track every bet you make and get alerts in real time. So if you're looking to bet smarter, an Action Network Pro subscription is the best way to get started. And for a limited time, our listeners can receive 50% off an annual Pro subscription. Just go to actionnetwork.com now and receive 50% off an annual subscription when you use the promo code KNOX. This offer won't last, so go to actionnetwork.com to sign up for a Pro subscription and use promo code KNOX, KNOCKS, to receive 50% off. And start betting smarter today.
So So the Drummond question we have comes from listener Ewing McDonald. Again, apologies for not getting to this on the actual mailbag pod. Andre Drummond is consistently rated as one of the best players in basketball in the defensive rating category. Any 1 or 2 years like this, and I think it's easy to dismiss as a statistically noisy outlier, but he's essentially been top 10 in the league in defensive rating since becoming a full-time starter. Defensive rating is obviously a single data point that doesn't prove anything, but I have a hard time squaring these numbers with the eye test. He usually makes the top 10 in blocks per game, but is far from what I would call a dominating rim protector, and he gets cooked every time he's in pick and roll coverage or switched on to perimeter guys. How would you reconcile this, Grant?
Oh man, I'd say I wish I had researched this a little bit more. Number one, no, I think he is. I'm looking at his on-off, stuff for his career right now, and I think that's instructive because he's got a couple of really massive negative on-court net rating swings, kind of interspersed with some decent, plus 5.5 in 15-16, minus 12.1 in 16-17, minus 1.5 the next year, plus 11.4 in 18-19, minus 1.5, minus 16.1. So he's all over the map. And I think what that sort of points to is that, one, yeah, all those stats are noisy. Defensive rating is especially noisy because it depends on who else is out there, depends on opponent shooting luck, depends on all kinds of stuff that are out of the individual player's control. And so I think generally you just have to look deeper than certainly individual defensive rating to gauge how effective a defensive big is, because there's just so much more that goes into it. Think of, Robin Lopez, just to kind of really get tangential, is not a good individual rebounder, but his teams always rebound better when he's on the floor. So you have to start looking at stuff that says, well, what does the team do when he's out there versus how does it look when he's not? So I don't know if that reconciles it, but he gets a ton of rebounds. And, for a stat like PER, for example, which I'm sure Drummond always rates highly in, loves defensive rebounding, loves high field goal percentages. That doesn't take into account the things he doesn't do, which is, get in good position and maybe not go for the defensive board. A lot of bigs at DeAndre Jordan, for example, would get out of position defensively or maybe not contest a shot that he otherwise could have because he wants defensive rebounding position. So to reconcile it, you got to look at more numbers, you got to consider context, and you have to watch the games to see what kind of player this guy is, as opposed to, well, his defensive rating is 98.4, so he's good. It just has to be, it's like anything, it's more complicated than just one number, I think.
And I think you look at the Stan Van Gundy coached years in Detroit specifically, and the two things that stand out are he was married to certain lineup combinations, Drummond, that probably performed better defensively than a lot of, if he was playing in other lineups that wouldn't have, because they wanted a very specific set of personnel around him. And then two, is he's never been that actual deterrent. He has never had great, I feel like this season, actually, the beginning with Cleveland is probably the best defense he had in front of him his entire career, maybe. But teams shoot better generally at the rim with him on the court. There's been a bunch of years where they take a higher percentage of their shots at the rim with him on the court, and I do think that speaks to his troubles. And then the third thing I would point out for why his defensive rating specifically is, some of these numbers are weird. I'm looking at the screenshot Ewing sent me, in 2017 and 2018, he was ranked first in individual defensive rating. That screams noisy to me. And also there were Detroit teams, I did not look this up, but they always seemed, not always, but there were Detroit teams that even being mediocre on defense in general, it felt like they overachieved. And so I think those things sort of combine to, one, my second point really just shows why he wouldn't be the great defenders. You don't use him to anchor these lineups. He can be part of a good defense. I just don't know that he could be the lifeblood of it. And we saw that in Detroit a bunch. And to his credit, he didn't have guards that could stop dribble penetration while he was in Detroit, really. He also played next to some power forwards. You look at Blake Griffin, who just weren't great defenders. And so that's going to sell him out even more. But again, I think the lineup combinations in Detroit specifically, understand Van Gundy even more specifically, probably helped buoy his defensive rating. I don't know if that's an adequate explanation, but he's sort of fascinating, just like the way we talked about another former Piston, Avery Bradley, and sort of his on-ball defense. I think smart team defenders just have inherently more value, even though they can't go and Robert Covington isn't going to lock up some guy, but because he can provide, weak side help at the rim, in addition to like closing out well and not leaving spot up shooters all alone forever, that's going to help you more than someone who can, sometimes they can take someone out of a game, but unless you're Ben Simmons, you're not taking a star out of a game. And Drummond's just he's never even been on the Embiid level where it's like, let alone Gobert, where it's like, hey, funnel the action into the back line. Like, you don't want to do that because there have been moments he has good hands and where he seems like he's played well in space, but it's just never been consistent either. And I'm not saying he has a low IQ, but that individual consistency, when you weed out all the other problems or factors that were around him, it just never felt like it's been there for him.
Yeah, I mean, just as another example, you mentioned the rim numbers. Like, I think if you look at enough different years, you start to sort of like normalize some of the variables, like lineup combinations and other stuff. Just 5 of the last 6 years, as I'm looking at it, opponents' effective field goal percentage has been higher with him on the floor than off. Now, that's all across the floor, so it's not just at the rim where maybe he's the primary defender, but even that's indicative of he's not that mobile, he's not that intuitive in help rotations, that type of thing. But also, just to make a broader point, and we can button this up because we're getting way into the weeds, sometimes, like, Andre Drummond's been a regular starter for his whole career. So he's playing typically, the first quarter, which is playing against first units. He'll play the third quarter, that's against first units. He'll play the last 6 minutes of the second and fourth quarter, that's against first units. So he's getting action against better competition. So that probably means he's got better teammates too, in theory. But I mean, all those little granular things, that's what some of the better advanced, catch-all metrics are doing now, is filtering out a lot of the stuff of, well, who are you playing against and who are you playing with? But yeah, I think, I don't know if anybody, like, has Drummond ever even been a serious consideration for an all defensive team? He hasn't made one. I can't remember a year where he was like even a serious thought on that end. So
no,
yeah,
I don't.
Good numbers, just not a helpful defensive player, generally speaking.
Yeah, and I thought maybe, like, could there be like the Roy Hibbert-ification of Andre Drummond here, where it's if you pull him out of the paint, he just becomes like super useless. I don't think that he's there, because if you look at some of the numbers, like, of him defending, I don't know what these, like, when you look at the, like Brook Lopez, for example, is shooting 1 of 7 against Andre Drummond on threes this year. I don't know how much noise is in there. I didn't watch every single one of those possessions.
Yeah.
It does seem like he just is going to struggle against the more mobile bigs. Like, if they can put the ball on the floor, forget about floor spacing, that's where his Achilles heel is going to be. And because those bigs exist in increasing frequency over the years, I would think that's probably hurt him as well. Again, I think your explanation, though, probably it does a better job of contextualizing why he ranks so high in individual defensive rating for the course of his career.
That's a good question. Good question, though.
Let's stick with this sort of same general topic. And so, fact or fiction, Blake Griffin or Al Horford will be traded by the deadline.
Fact, and it's got to be Horford.
I think a smart team should do it.
I think so, too. I mean, you see the Boston talk because that trade exception kind of works out. I think this is the great misconception about the trade exception that Boston has, which is $28.5 million, is they're hard capped. And so right now they can only use like 19 or 21 of it unless they slough off some other salary. So it's like, oh, Vucevic fits. Like, no, he doesn't, because they'd have to make some moves to clear extra room for that. But Horford fits. They
look like they have 22, or I have them. So this is, trust my math, $22 million in room below the apron. So
yeah, I've seen like 3 different accounts of it. So some of the Celtics guys have it at like 21 or 22.1. I saw 19. It's not 28.5. I know that.
It's so they're somewhere between 15 and 16 under the tax, and then they're somewhere between like 21 and 22 under the apron. I think that's fair to say. But they can't use the full thing without moving other salary.
Right. So but the to get back to it, Horford might make some sense. I don't know. That's like, but whereas if just for comparison's sake, if you're the Celtics and it's like, and it's not apples to apples because Griffin makes way more and with the trade exceptions out the window, but it's like, of course you'd rather have Al Horford than Blake Griffin, right? Like even if the money were the same, I think. I think Horford makes sense on a good team. Griffin, I don't know what Griffin does for you. Like I don't know what his role is.
Yeah, and again, unless you're getting off a worse contract, which I feel
what is that?
Right. There are very few right now. Is Washington trading Russell Westbrook for him, and what are they attaching to it? But looking at Griffin, maybe he could rest up and get to the rim more, and he'll be shooting better because he was shooting threes okay at the beginning of the year. He still has that $39 million player option. Al Horford has 2 more years at 53.5, and it's actually lower than that. It's about $39 million guaranteed exactly because there's a $14.5 million guarantee in that latter season. So he's just going to do more for you as a defender and a passer at this point, and maybe even as a floor spacer, depending on what Griffin's really doing. So the price point is high. It would be hysterical if he goes back to the Celtics after Boston, it seems, had the opportunity to get Miles Turner as part of Hayward's departure. But other teams like, Charlotte fancies itself something and can use a big. Dallas, I don't want to link Dallas to every big, but Horford can certainly play with Kristaps, and you have James Johnson and Powell right there. So can you give – does OKC even just do that? Because Powell is so much cheaper than Horford after this year. Maybe. San Antonio would be interesting, just a straight up Aldridge for Horford swap, and can OKC put something small in there, like as a sweetener? And if Toronto wants to spend big on a center, I know Drummond comes off the books. I'd rather see Horford there as opposed to Andre Drummond. But I think you could come up with teams. I even thought about Portland for a minute, where it's like maybe I'm undervaluing a healthy use of Nurkic, but Horford just might be a better fit for that roster, especially considering how bad they were defensively while Nurkic was healthy this year.
Yeah, I mean, and this is scary because Horford's a center, and he has been a center for a very long time. But, the Sixers kind of toyed with, in addition to him being not someone who will guard Joel Embiid anymore and also could back him up, he played with him a little bit. And you look at it this year, and Horford's shooting 39% from three on more volume than he's ever had. So offensively, at least, and he's a good passer, he's a smart player. You could talk yourself into maybe this guy's a 4. I don't know. We'd have to rejigger some weird lineup stuff around him, but I think that expands, the spectrum of teams that might talk themselves into him. That, unless you're talking about the minimum after a buyout for Griffin, which is what is that buyout going to be? If that's even possible, I just don't know. I don't know what team says, well, Blake Griffin is someone that, we got to have. I don't know.
Buyout, if he gets there, I think there's a team that would take a flyer. I would say.
Oh, yeah.
It's
a minimum.
Let's do fact or fiction on this. Blake Griffin gets bought out and ends up with the Miami Heat.
I don't know how, what are the terms you agree to on a buyout? I
think he just gives back $5 million, and Detroit should take the entire hit next year. Is what they should do. And I almost feel like they're trying to force him into a buyout and maybe I doubt Griffin wants to sit at this point after sitting so much last year, unless he's just so banged up and wants to get his knees right, or he needs more rest. But this almost feels like a tactic where it's hey, you're not going to be traded if we're going to move you. We're not going to move you. So if you want to go play somewhere else and actually see the court, you're going to have to agree to a buyout and give us back some money, which again would lead to Draymond's point of that kind of sucks because, Griffin doesn't have that same level of player empowerment that other stars do. There are 20 players, let's say, that have that type of leverage, maybe 25.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think I'm trying to imagine it from Griffin's perspective, where the Pistons come and say, "Hey, you got to," because I don't know who has the leverage in this situation. Everybody's powerless. It feels like, because Griffin, he doesn't have market value, and the Pistons don't need him and don't want to play him, and even if he were good, they wouldn't be interested. I'm trying to imagine, because I think $5 million is if you're Griffin. And why am I giving up anything? Anything beyond what a buyout situation would normally cost a player. Mm-hmm. But if I'm the Pistons, I'm I don't know, man. I'm not gonna just let you off the hook. I don't know. It's a mess. It's a total mess. I really have. It's kind of one of the most sadly kind of interesting aspects of this season now, because I just don't see a clean resolution to it.
I think he's gonna end up in Miami on a buyout, and that, or I don't know what's going to happen with this Anthony Davis injury, but if he gets bought out, I could see a spot for him on the Lakers. But with Miami, it feels like he might have a chance to, and maybe he goes somewhere out of left field that he knows he'll be able to close with them, just to be in the closing units. But I think he'll at least have an opportunity in Miami. So that is my guess. Maybe it turns out to be a terrible one, though. Who knows? Let's see. Where are we going with this? All right, let's settle on this because I have so many. Fact or fiction, Nikola Vucevic deserves to be an all-star more than Julius Randle.
Oh, well, that's fact, and I know that because I was doing this today, and Vucevic does not make my All-Star team in the East. He was like the last guy cut, and then I sort of forgot that, oh yeah, Julius Randle's having a crazy statistical year, and I didn't actually even consider him for that last spot. So just based on that, I think Vooch does, even though the Knicks are a better team and Randle's numbers are completely ridiculous. But Vooch's numbers are ridiculous too, and is it possible to say that Vooch has less help than Randle does?
Yeah, I mean,
it probably does.
Look at the Magic just lost Cole Anthony. Michael Carter Williams only just started playing again. I think Evan Fournier's been banged up. Aaron Gordon's out. Jonathan Isaac's out. Markelle Fultz is out. I don't even think Aminu's in the league anymore at this point. That's a joke. I know that he is. So he has less help. I think he's probably more useful on defense. And Julius Randle's shouldering a heavier burden as a passer, which I think matters. But Nikola Vucevic has just been one of the most valuable shooters in the league this year. And I did this like relative to value added to the league average per shot. And he graded out as one of the 10 most valuable shooters in the league, just statistically. That's not the perfect way to do it, but he's shooting 43% on relatively high volume from three. He's taken almost 50 more 3-point attempts than Julius Randle right now. They're about the same on 2-point percentage. If you look at their like production, they're both, Vucevic, 23.7 points a game. Julius Randle, 23.1. Vucevic, 11.4 boards per game. Randle, 11. Randle has him beat pretty handily in assists. He's getting to the free throw line more, which is just a function of he's going to face up more in attack. It's close. I don't know what I would call this one. I almost feel like it should be fiction just because Julius Randle is more of a surprise, but I kind of feel like it's a fact. And Vooch might even make, if I were to fill out, I think I filled out a ballot for Bleacher Report a couple weeks ago, and he was certainly on it. So this one was tough for me, and I don't have to give an answer because you're the guest. But I think I lean towards fact when you just factor in the shooting, and he just does more stuff. He's better hands on defense, and he can hold up as a primary rim protector more.
So I was down to those last two wild card predictions for East reserves today, and we'll throw Randle in there just for comparison's sake. And so the guys I was down to were Zach LaVine, Trae Young, Vucevic, Van Vliet, Ben Simmons, and Randle. So it's 6 for 2 spots, basically. And going through it, I'll just spoil it because who cares? I picked Trae and I picked Ben Simmons almost totally because the numbers are close enough with all those guys and you can sort of pick what you like, because I just think those two are objectively the best two players. And that's what it came down to. But looking at it, like LaVine is having an insanely efficient scoring year. It's just like absurd. He's shooting like 57% at the rim, 43% from deep. Just unbelievable. Like on par with, you name it, the elite territory. But Vucevic is shooting an identical percentage from deep, and this is a center. So it's just like, okay, well, that's just completely a different type of asset to an offense than when a guard can do that. And the volume's not that different. And so, again, those aren't the two guys we're comparing, but Vucevic has had a phenomenal offensive season. The Magic started Gary Clark and I think James Ennis the last game I watched them. So it's just like, what are we?
And Dwayne Bacon. There were games where all three of them were starting at the same time, which is just
that's right. It was harrowing, unbelievable.
Let's get super specific about the trade deadline right here. Victor Oladipo will finish the season in Dallas, Memphis, or Toronto. Fact or fiction?
Oh, why isn't Miami in there?
I don't want Miami to be in there.
Don't they want his bird rights? I don't know. I think I threw that in some makeup trade.
They have less cap space than when they were supposed to because they extended Bam Adebayo, but I don't know what the pathway to Miami getting him is. Are you giving up Duncan Robinson or Tyler Hero in a Victor Oladipo trade? I'm probably not.
Hell no. Give me the teams. Memphis, Toronto, and what was the third one?
Or Dallas.
Let's say Dallas.
It's fact or fiction. You could just statistically pick the field. I
don't go that way. Fact, Dallas. We're gonna pin me to this forever. Actually, Dallas. I know you're not the only one that's going to say everybody that's available is going to end up in Dallas. I feel like Oladipo was one of the who's Dallas's third star going to be, and within the last couple of years that's been a big conversation.
Here's my question: who's Dallas's second star?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Is that the guy they thought was it ain't it, or it doesn't look like it right now. Oladipo was always someone that kind of made sense, or at least like the idealized version of Oladipo, like a combo guard that could defend and create a shot and just kind of up the athleticism. He's not that same guy anymore, obviously. But But I'm just going to say fact and go with Dallas because I actually do kind of like how that looks on the off chance Oladipo is, going to get rejuvenated and whatever, show Dallas that he's worth keeping via bird rights.
I'm going to say fact too. I really want Memphis to trade for him just because if you were like sub in him for Dillon Brooks in the starting lineup, that team makes so much more sense. And think about Dillon Brooks getting to cook against second units a little bit more where his bruising play is probably more valuable. Both Dallas, I look at Dallas and Memphis specifically need that just like second theoretical high-level shot creator. I'm not sure if Victor Oladipo can do that for long stretches now, and he's currently out with a foot injury. His right quad had flared up too before that. He has not played necessarily well in Houston, but I think that just means that maybe you're able to get him for a more reasonable cost because he's going to be a free agent and Houston has no business paying for him. And there might be value in having his bird rights, even if you are a team like Miami or Dallas or even Memphis that can get to cap space this summer, just because there's going to be so much cash floating around out there. It almost doesn't matter. Victor Oladipo has to fall off a cliff to not get paid this summer. That money has to go somewhere. He's probably a top 5 free agent and is going to be top 3 once Drew Holiday signs an extension and people realize Kawhi is not going to consider leaving the Clippers. So there might just be value in having him there. And I don't know if Toronto or Memphis will think about being a buyer towards the trade deadline, but man, I love the idea of Oladipo next to a healthy Oladipo anyway, next to John Morant. And Oladipo kind of fits the way that Memphis likes to defend too. And you could go hyper small. Think about when Memphis is at full strength, just a lineup of Oladipo, Melton, and Morant, just at 1, 2, and 3. That's something that I would endlessly watch.
Yeah, no, that would, I mean, those are all, I love the idea of just a bunch of athletic, like dogged defenders running around it. And really Brooks kind of fits that, except he just fouls everything that moves, nonstop. I feel like a couple years ago, I like got on the soapbox and said, I like Dillon Brooks. I thought that contract he signed was really great. And ever since then, every time I watch him, he goes like 2 for 13 and gets like 5 fouls in 17 minutes.
He's the Norman Powell of the Western Conference. You're waiting for that.
I get a John Starks vibe from him. Like the whole thing.
In terms of expectations, where it's like, oh, he's good, but like he never stays that way for a while, and he's always going to be better in theory than practice, and he's always going to be on the verge though of like that next step. Like we've been waiting for a Norman Powell breakout for the past since like 2008, and that's obviously an exaggeration. He wasn't in the league then.
When he was in junior high.
Or as Sharon Brown came on the podcast and said before the season that he's Dollar Tree Kobe with his shot selection. And so, okay, so fact or fiction, at 6-10 since the Victor Oladipo trade, the Pacers should be panicking.
Fiction, and it's just because I think an obvious major factor is like they have 2 very good wing players that are not playing. The Karis LeVert hasn't played. TJ Warren, I don't know how much. Like, did he play 1 game or did he play 4 before he had foot surgery? Whatever it is, like those are 2. I don't know. Turner and Sabonis and Brogdon are all very good players, but I mean, if they had those 2, then you've got. I mean, that starting unit is nails. Like, I really like that starting 5.
Their projected closing lineup, which would be the same. Like it feels like. In terms of that, it feels like a one-size-fits-all thing where, you need to play matchups, but their starting 5 with what should be their 5 healthy guys almost feels like, well, you could close that against almost any team in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gives you almost just so much like what box is not checked by that team? I guess Warren has developed before he got hurt into like a really good wing defender from 2 years ago. It was terrible. So yeah, I think it's just. I'm not panicking just because of health. Like the Pacers, their shot profile makes sense this year after it never made sense under Nate McMillan. They have significant talent. I mean, Turner, you know more than anybody that Miles Turner should be a front runner for
defensive player of the millennia. Yeah.
Yeah. Just build a statue of that guy blocking a shot. I'm not worried. I mean, I just think it's a health thing, and I like a lot of the peripherals, and they've had a bad stretch, but I'm not concerned about it.
This is our first disagreement as a podcast couple. I'm excited for it.
Okay.
Everything you say makes sense, and so I don't know that this is a red alarm fire here. I'm absolutely concerned. The way that they're defending right now And look, a lot of it is there are lineups where Jeremy Lamb is playing the 4 and it's Sabonis at the 5, or even McDermott is the 4 and Sabonis is the 5. I don't understand. Looking at the lineup data, which I did before this, Justin Holiday, because he's starting now, but even in the lone big lineups, he sees more time at the 4 next to Miles Turner. And then Sabonis has McDermott and Lamb at the 4 when he's the lone big. And it feels like that should flip-flop just based off how those two work defensively. And they're probably being too aggressive with Sabonis' defensive coverages, or at least they're not adjusting for matchups. And something that stands out to me, and maybe I'm just on a crusade to justify the fact that I didn't predict Miles Turner to win Defensive Player of the Year. And if that is creeping into a bias, I honestly apologize, because I've been higher on Miles Turner than the consensus for years.
Yeah, me too.
But apparently I overlooked him in that discussion, whatever. I still don't think he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, and I don't know where he's going to finish on the ballot. But here's the thing. They have a top 9 defense overall, 1.11 points allowed per possession. They're surrendering against top 12 offenses, which is a span of 12 games, which is a small sample size, but also half the season, basically. 1.17 points per possession, which would be the equivalent of 29th place. So a small sample, but they've had trouble against some of the elite offenses. And I think they haven't played 2 teams in this. They have not played Denver or the Lakers yet. If I'm mistaken there's a chance that it's worse. So I don't know how real the defense is. And I'm not sure that Warren coming back and you no longer have to play Jeremy Lamb at the 4. That's going to be huge. Even Karis LeVert. And LeVert can be a good defender. I would say against 1s and 2s, he's kind of stretched against wings and he vacillates. So I do think there's a chance that could help. But if you think they're going to be a top 10 defense all year, that's probably something I'd push back against. And considering how that was touted, how their aggressive style of defense now matters, or how it was painted that it matters, I think that could end up being a fairly big deal. You're going to have to go through a lot of these offenses to do well in the playoffs, basically. And Brooklyn has not gotten any easier since they've played Brooklyn. They've only played, and the only top 12 offense they've played twice is the Pelicans, and they played fairly well against them. 107.4 defensive rating in one of those games. Oh, they played the Raptors twice too, and they actually did pretty well there. But just concerning against how they've played against the upper echelon offenses in the league to me. That coupled with their injuries, which can be a concern itself, because when does Karis LeVert come back? Does he come back?
Yeah.
And so I'm saying fact that they should be panicking.
Why were they so much better defensively last year? I'm looking at it. They were, and Cleaning the Glass had them as 6th in defensive rating last season. It was Sabonis Turner. It was, Warren played more, I guess. I don't know. I
more conservative style too. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah.
But
it's weird how sometimes, their changing shot profile shouldn't necessarily mean that they're not getting back, or I didn't split out the transition defense number versus half court stuff, but it is weird how there always seems to be some kind of trade-off when you really switch up your whole approach. But yeah, I don't know. I guess some of my lack of concern is that I didn't come into this season thinking the Pacers were going to be really great. I was more surprised by when they looked like they were very good earlier this year than them kind of slipping back.
There are encouraging harbingers when you look at Miles Turner shooting better from 3 during this stretch where they're 6 and 10. Malcolm Brogdon is going to shoot better. I think he struggled more on his drives and hitting pull-up 3 since Oladipo is gone, and that's actually not a surprise because it kind of felt like the same story as last season wore on. Having Warren or LeVert, let alone both, that'll help him out a ton. So there are encouraging signs there. I think most of them are on offense, though, and I'm not sure how much that's necessarily going to matter. Let's get back to the trade deadline. This one, okay, fact or fiction, Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal will be traded this season.
Well, if Bradley Beal gets traded, it will be like the greatest smokescreen of all time, because he and the Wizards have just been in lockstep saying this isn't going to happen. I'm going to go get bold and say fact and say LaVine will be the one that's traded, because the Bulls are going nowhere. This is as well as he can possibly play, and they still get outscored by 10 points per 100 possessions when he's on the floor, or their net rating's 10 points worse when he's on the court. So I think the Bulls feel like a team that the last rebuild didn't work, and so now it's time to start the next one. And LaVine should return a pretty good haul, because his contract is very reasonable for what he is, and it's possible that if you get him on a better team where like maybe he doesn't even have to play such a high usage offensive role, and his efficiency inexplicably goes up. Like there's, and you can hide him defensively a little bit better. I think LaVine would have real value, and so the Bulls at least should think about trading him. But I'm starting to believe this Beal stuff where like they're just not going to do it. So I think it's fact, but it's got to be LaVine.
I'm with you. I'm actually disappointed that we're so in lockstep with this one. Here's the thing for me, though. So there are two ways to look at the next star available landscape following the James Harden blockbuster. One, there are only two names that fit that bill, and I think they're Beal or LaVine. I don't, know what you can't throw Andre Drummond in there. Victor Oladipo, that's a stretch at this point. Even if you wanted to throw Kristaps Porzingis' name in there, if you think Dallas should be shopping him, he doesn't necessarily fit that bill. So there's that. And then you look at it, to me, you could look at it through two lenses. One, now is not the time to go all in on a deal for a marquee name when the season has been subject to just so many topsy-turvy competitive landscape issues, a lot of it having to do with COVID, not to mention injuries, or because the pool of available heavyweight players is just so bone thin, one reluctant seller is going to invariably be coaxed into giving up someone because there will be an offer that amounts to a king's ransom and a half. Yeah. And Chicago seems perfectly positioned to do that. LaVine has not aged himself out of the rebuild. He's in his mid-20s. And I think the bigger concern for them is I still don't know that he's of the no-brainer max contract quality. And with him coming up on free agent 2022, like you said, is there a chance that this is his absolute peak? Yes, so you're going to get value for him now. And if you don't want to max him out in 2022 or in advance of that, I would look at moving him. And I do think there'll be tantalizing offers out there because there are just so few options that you have to figure at least one desperate team is going to come in over the top with something. And Bradley Beal's stance with the Wizards kind of works out in that favor because, yeah, it's limiting the technically available pool of stars, but I think that only then ups what Chicago can get for LaVine right now because I would hazard over the summer, Bradley Beal is probably going to become available or to at least be a hotter topic of discussion.
Yeah, he's got to. It's amazingly, the Wizards just don't seem like they're going to pull the trigger on it this year. It's hard to find a LaVine fit, though. Like, I mean, in a weird way, because he makes $19.5 million this year and next. And theoretically, like, yeah, everybody should want a guy that's 60% plus true shooting and can, hand out a few. He's a serviceable passer, I think, that gets, volume assists because he has the ball so much. But, like, just as a pure offensive player, you know what the thing is? Here's the worry I'd have if I'm trading for LaVine is that, like, he's actually a sixth man. Like the idealized version of him on a good team where he's not going to cost you.
Did you just Lou Williams, Zach LaVine right now? That seems excessive.
Well, like that's my fear if I'm trading for him and I got to pay whatever this inflated cost is going to be that we're talking about. Because, like, again, the on-off stuff, we just spent, however many minutes talking about how you can't just fixate on one stat, but, like, LaVine just cannot play better offensive. This is like as good as it gets for like almost anyone short of Steph Curry, James Harden, Kyrie, Durant, like all those guys. And he's still a net negative player by a huge margin. And it's not like the guys coming off the Bulls bench are world beaters, even though like Thad Young and Garrett Temple like have been their best players by a lot of metrics this year. So I'm concerned that on a good team, like on a bad team, this is what LaVine is, like high 20s, efficient stuff. On a good team, you're just not going to give him the ball this much. You're not going to play him this much because he's going to get eaten up on defense and all this other stuff. So that would be my concern if we're talking about like what it will theoretically cost to get him.
The two teams that interest me most are Golden State. You're not cringing, so awesome. And Philly, I think are the
blacked
team.
Out.
Philly can definitely cover up for him defensively, and the theory of him, he can play with Ben Simmons. And now all of a sudden those minutes without Embiid, they get a lot beefier, whether you're playing with Simmons and LaVine or if it's LaVine and Dwight Howard, because that's the natural. They're trying not to play Howard and Simmons together too much this season. That helps. And I think LaVine is someone you could get if you include enough picks. You don't have to, Ben Simmons isn't going to be on the table there. And for the Warriors, I don't know. He's not costing you James Wiseman, even though I might consider it. I'm just not as high on James Wiseman as anybody else. But he's only going to cost you either the mini pick or not. If you get, again, shorting the Warriors' future at this point is not a bad idea at all. And so if you include enough future first rounders, maybe you get away with not giving either one of those primetime assets, but you're not going to have to give up more than one. And that's why it's interesting for them is it sort of allows them to hedge. I don't expect the Warriors to make a big move because I think that they're cowards, basically. But Philly would interest me, and I think that you can talk yourself into, in a Golden State, you just need someone competently. What LaVine's doing now in Chicago, if he could just do even 75% of that when Stephen Curry isn't on the floor for Golden State, how much better is Golden State in that scenario?
That's not to go too deep on the Warriors, but like that's just clearly they just have nobody that can generate anything that's not Steph. So like, yeah, I'd say Zach LaVine would be an offensive upgrade from Brad Wanamaker, who like tends to run second units, and like instead of
Jeremy Lin would be an actual upgrade over Brad Wanamaker too. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, LaVine's interesting. I don't know. I hope that comes to pass because I would like to see him on a good team and see what that looks like.
You have 10-ish minutes left, correct?
Yes.
Let's move away from the trade deadline for a second. Okay. Anthony Davis's injury will win LeBron the MVP award. Fact or fiction?
Ooh. I'm going to say fiction because I don't think he needs this stretch of whatever he's going to do with Davis out to hold on to his top 3 possible favorite status. Like, I think LeBron will continue to do what he's doing. Like, I'm going to be the idiot that says, like, I don't know if LeBron has a higher regular season gear for like 3 weeks than this. I don't know that he's got that in him, or that he wants to do that. So that's a tough call. That is such a good narrative thing though, because it can just imagine how it plays out where it's like he goes for 35, 10 and 10 for the whole time AD is out. But I'll say fiction. I think LeBron has as good a shot as anybody at it right now, and I don't think Davis's absence is going to put him on some put him on some crazy run that locks it up.
I'm going to say fact just because I kind of have a feeling Anthony Davis might be out for a while, and I'm not saying LeBron will be my MVP pick. As of right now, I'd probably go with Joel Embiid, but when you build LeBron is going to get votes because he's doing this in his age 36 season. I don't think it's fair to view it in those terms for MVP, but there's no like clear-cut criteria. And so it's, you can make an argument. You're talking about plucking Steph off the Warriors. Look how terrible they'd be. But are we going to reward Steph because the front office doesn't know how to build a roster around him? I know they're missing Clay, but like they didn't have enough shooting around him to begin with, and then they doubled down on that with Kelly Oubre Jr., who's playing better. But it's like it's the same thing where you can't penalize Giannis last year because the Bucks roster around him was so good when he was elevating a great team. LeBron has a case as of right now, and I would probably say a top 3 case. I think we put him second, or I put him second, you put him first when we actually did this exercise. But now that he has sort of this added value of, okay, Kawhi Leonard has started to miss games. Kevin Durant has kind of almost faded out of the MVP race at this point because he's missed games. Joel Embiid is invariably going to miss games and missed a couple with back tightness. If he's playing in these regular season games and Anthony Davis isn't in them and the Lakers don't, plunge into the depths of third place in the West or something, like I don't know how far they could realistically fall. I think it's going to win him the MVP award because that narrative, he's already has just the narrative machine behind him because of the age factor. And this I do agree with, the shortened offseason. That's absolutely something that you could say and wait in the MVP discussion. I think this is going to push it over the top and he eventually wins. I don't know if he'll be my pick, but I think this stretch is going to do it. Now, if Anthony Davis plays in 2 or 3 days and I look like an idiot for this, okay, fine. It's still going to be a debate, but I'm going to say fact just because he's already so close to it. Just the argument he's going to have if he helps the Lakers navigate a long stretch without another top 5, top 7 player, that's going to do wonders for his argument.
I was going to say the real fact in all this is what you said a second ago about like Davis is going to be out longer than that timeline. Like just there's no scenario where you mess around with this injury when the Lakers are very good and they have like a legit shot to win a title like this. The next 3 months don't matter. Forget 3 weeks,
Let's see if we can get to a couple smaller markets here. Minnesota, fact or fiction, Malik Beasley will finish the season on a different team.
Well, I got to eat crow. I'll say fiction. He's been really good for them. Like there's a case that he's their best player, or at least most productive player this season. It would be Towns, obviously, if his season hadn't been kind of ruined for several reasons. But I think I had Beasley's deal as one of the worst of the offseason. I just thought he was like an empty calories guy. I didn't think he'd sustain the 3-point shooting that he had when he came over last year, which he hasn't, but he's been phenomenal nonetheless. I think he's a good wing player that defensively not great, but I think Minnesota actually has like a fair value deal for him now. And he's young enough to where you could envision him being, maybe he's not a starter in like the fully realized version of the Wolves down the line, but like he's a contributor. So they don't have a lot of those guys. So I think he's probably going to stick around.
I'm going to say fact, because now would be the time to move him for all the reasons you just said. Averaging over 20 points per game, shooting above 40% on his pull-up threes. And I don't know that maybe his deal, this is proof that it's going to age just fine, but he hasn't had to play. I mean, D'Angelo Russell and Karl-Anthony Towns have played 5 games together since the trade. That was over a year ago at this point. So he hasn't played with the full version of the Timberwolves. And I think now is, if you're married at all to Jared Culver, Anthony Edwards, Josh Okogie has been borderline unplayable this season. So maybe you feel better that you don't have a ton of these younger wing options. But it almost feels like an either-or situation here where you have to be aggressive in some form. And whether you want to rack up more picks or a young player, or you want to go out there and buy, Malik Beasley feels like integral to either package, because the lack of wings available at this trade deadline, you have to think contenders are going to want someone, if Zach LaVine isn't gettable or the price is too high for him, Malik Beasley is a nice substitute there. Doesn't have the same creation ceiling by any stretch, but can hit, has some off the bounce pizzazz to his game. So I think he's going to be like that dark horse, highly sought after player at the trade deadline. If you can really capitalize on his value, when he probably is better off on a good team at this point, and how long before Minnesota is good? How long are you waiting here? And if you keep him, and that's a rotation spot, like you're essentially saying, okay, one of Edwards or Culver just isn't lasting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd feel better about the idea of them moving Beasley for value if Culver had shown that he's like an NBA player at this, which he just hasn't, And Okogie, Okogie can defend, but he just like he's half of a good NBA player because he can't score at all. So like God, it's ugly. I'm just looking at their wings right now. It's going to be interesting. Side note for Anthony Edwards to kind of have the ball a lot more going forward. He's had a couple interesting games, kind of doing some primary ball handling. So maybe that I don't know. I'm just talking about the Timberwolves too much now. What's the next one?
Fact or fiction? Lonzo Ball will remain in New Orleans for the rest of the season.
I'm going to say fiction and be simple about it. I think if the Pelicans were sure he was someone they valued enough to keep, that there would have been an extension signed. And I do think that somebody is going to value, we've been talking about bird rights, someone's going to value having his match rights in restricted free agency, I think. And I think it just doesn't, this is a stupid explanation, but it just doesn't feel like he's someone that they see as a long-term fit, because they would have locked him up. They locked up Brandon Ingram, very different player, different level of player, but they do commit, I think we've seen, when they have somebody that they value, and he doesn't seem to be one of those players.
Now does seem like the time to move him. Since he was mentioned in trade rumors, he's played 12 games. He's averaging 15.4 points, shooting 45.2% on 7.8 three-point attempts per game, 4.8 assists. He's he's not a lockdown one-on-one defender, but he's just a good disruptive defender for someone who's going to guard a lot of ones and twos. But the fact of the matter is he's never put together, and I've vacillated on, I remain a Lonzo Ball believer, but it always feels like it's the Jamal Murray syndrome where it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but then there's this huge drop-off. And maybe you don't want, and like you said, why wouldn't you have just locked him down this season, played out, and if you want to move him over the summer, that deal probably is theoretically still movable. I would probably say fact, he still finishes it in New Orleans just because he's played so well. Like, what are you going to get? Like, the Lonzo Ball for Lowry marketing trade now is just, I wouldn't do that if I were New Orleans. What else are you attaching to that, Chicago, if something is getting done? So it'd be interesting to see him, in New York. I don't think he brings what Golden State needs to a T, because he's shooting under 35% on drives, doesn't get to the rim, can't run. Not that they're running a ton of pick and roll, but during the non-Steph minutes, he's just not someone who could do that. But they need high IQ players, and he's certainly that. So that'd be a team I'd be interested to see him on. I honestly don't know. I'm just going to lean towards fact, because he's playing so well, and what value are you going to get for this production when he's so close to restricted free agency? A sign and trade, or signing him with the intent to trade him later, feels like it might be the more efficient route for him.
Yeah, I just, to put a button on that one, I really do think, we keep saying this, but I think he's the type of guy that needs to be on a good team, because you said it about the Warriors. Ball's strengths are not your conventional, point guard. He's not a good pick and roll player. He's not a good isolation scorer. He's not the best one-on-one defender. But if you sort of think of him as, like, just to do the Warriors thing, very different player, but someone like Sean Livingston, who just will make the right pass, will kind of anticipate things well, can switch a little bit, can make the right decision off the ball, like all that stuff. That just plays better on a good team, because if you're the only guy doing that on a bad team, one, you're probably going to stop making those efforts because nobody else is doing it. And two, when you do it, it doesn't matter because the other four guys or three of the other four or whatever are doing the wrong things. Like if Lonzo Ball makes the right rotation or anticipates something, and Zion Williamson is like running in circles somewhere else over here on defense, and Brandon Ingram is hung up on a screen like bug on a windshield, it doesn't matter. But on a good team, I think it makes a big difference. So I'd love to see what he could do on a team where, like, maybe he's not even a starter, but he gets minutes with the starters and he makes a difference.
Do you have time for one more quick one?
Yes.
The Miami Heat. The Miami Heat's problems are more than injury/COVID related.
Can we throw in turnovers too? Because they were leading the league in turnovers.
But that's,
really
they are still, they're the team, they're dead last in turnover percentage, but, I'm saying their problems are not due, factor friction, their problems are not due to the availability of solely due to the availability of the personnel they've had this season. And they've missed, every team's been hit by this, but you look at the time that Butler has missed, Dragic has missed, they've played Gabriel Vincent this season a bunch along with other players. So I think it's easy to provide. They're 8-7 with Jimmy Butler in the lineup, for whatever that matters. And I don't even think Jimmy Butler's come close to peaking or playing up to snuff. But where do you land on that? Factor fiction, is this availability related, or is there something more sinister at play here?
So let's look at theoretically their best lineup, which is Hero, Robinson, Butler, Olynyk, and Adebayo. I guess reasonable minds could disagree, but that's their most used lineup, and I think that's probably their best. I don't know if maybe Dragic belongs in there, or maybe you'd like someone else in there for Olynyk, but that lineup's plus 18 per 100. And they haven't played a lot together, but that's a big number. So I think certainly the Heat have issues with, like, Dragic was never going to be as good as he was in the bubble last year. Hero, I think, like, can't possibly be the guy that he was in the playoffs because he was just a ridiculous teenager. So I do think they have a couple bigger problems, but I don't know what the percentage is. I feel like 85% of the things that have afflicted them this year are the ones you mentioned. So I guess the answer is fact. There is more that's cause for concern with the Heat than COVID, than injury, than fatigue, but, like, not a lot. Like, I think they're still going to be a very dangerous playoff team as long as they can keep that lineup and a couple other bodies healthy.
I'm going to actually say it's a fact, and I hate criticizing teams that have been going through this, so I'll side with you. They got to do something about, like, the 4 spot. It's just not nearly as dynamic as it was last year. Even if you want to use Jimmy Butler for some of those minutes, I think it helps that Tyler Hero's playing better, even in the times when he's basically their point guard. But the turnovers are a problem, and I think just looking at their front court rotation next to Bam, I don't know how playable Bam and Olynyk are together in some playoff matchups. I don't know what you can get from Andre Iguodala for long stretches of time at this point. Like, you need someone more dynamic offensively who can shoot, and I still don't understand why they didn't re-sign Jay Crowder. I'm very much of the mind that if you need cap space, create it later. And was Jay Crowder on, even if it was a 4-year deal at the full mid-level, is Jay Crowder not movable at that point? Maybe he really knew that Miami was going to trade him anyway. That's why he didn't go back. But I think that ends up hurting them a ton. So I don't think they're going to come, and COVID and fatigue and health issues, they're all part of that. I would be very surprised if they come close to even sniffing the peak that they had last year.
They missed Derrick Jones Jr. too, because he was the head of the snake in that zone, and that was just a whole different dimension that they had that they could bust out and like flip a quarter, win a quarter just all of a sudden with that defense. So that 4 spot is rough.
Grant, you stayed a full 60+ seconds later than you promised me, so I'm forever grateful. If you guys are not following him on Twitter, remedy that post haste at GT_Hughes. Thanks so much for joining us, and look, you know it. I'm going to be pestering you again very soon.
Thank you.